What's up, everyone? Welcome to the NBA Pick and Pod. My name's Dawson Shine, and I'm coming at you with another episode of free agency updates. And I've got a couple of interesting segments today. First of all, I'm going to talk about some big signings that happened, some small signings that happened, Warriors getting a little bit better as usual, and finally, I want to bring up a couple people who haven't been signed yet, and a specific team that I'm going to leave as a mystery for now, who's making very odd moves in order to do something that I think needs to be spoken about and is pretty cool to watch, or just interesting as an NBA fan. But there will be more to come about that later on in the episode. First off, I want to talk about Manu who decided to play another year in the NBA. He will be returning to the San Antonio Spurs, 1 year, $14 million deal. This boy's getting paid. It's pretty ridiculous to imagine a guy in his final year in the NBA looking to get $14 million, but the Spurs were forced to pay that much. Originally, when I heard the story came out, you're looking at that going, wow, that's fantastic loyalty by the organization, paying a star player that helped them win so many championships. You're thinking they're doing that just to show appreciation, right? Wrong. Turns out, the Spurs actually offered him $3 million to play his final year. $3 million. So, why the hell would they offer him $14 million in which he signed? Well, interestingly enough, 76ers have just come out recently and revealed that they offered Manu Ginobili a huge 2-year deal worth approximately $12 million a year and the first year guaranteed. Now, that's pretty crazy to think about, that they actually forced the Spurs to up their offer by more than 4.5 times what they originally gave him. They lowballed him so much, Ginobili actually considered signing with the 76ers. But there's no way the Spurs were going to let that happen. That would have been ridiculous if Ginobili was a 76er for the final year of his career. I mean, who can even consider that a possibility? But that didn't happen. The San Antonio Spurs did match the offer, giving him $14 million for the final year, which really limits cap space, and may have been why they were actually forced to let Boban Marjanovic go to the Detroit Pistons. 76ers might have actually screwed over the Spurs a little bit, and I think that's hilarious because the 76ers have been throwing around these offers at random players, like Dwayne Wade, for example, just to up their value so much in order to force other teams to limit themselves in their cap space because the 76ers have just an ample amount of it. And that's pretty funny and pretty genius. You see that happen with players using certain organizations like the Mavericks consistently to raise their trade value and raise their re-signing value. But the 76ers have actually been one of the main contributors to this upping of value of certain players this offseason. I mean, Ginobili's not worth $14 million. That's obvious. The dude's at the end of his career. He probably will not be playing again the year after that. And this past season, he really wasn't that good overall. He had a couple of good moments, but I mean, he's not worth $14 million. That's a lot of money. But thanks to the 76ers, the Spurs now have a completely limited cap space and were unable to sign a key free agent that they wanted to keep in order to protect the rim, Boban Marjanovic. So thank you 76ers, for limiting the parity in the Western Conference even more. I'm joking, of course. That was really just the fault of Kevin Durant. But enough about that story, which continues to piss me off. There are some other non-signings that are really interesting. The key one being Lance Stephenson still being a free agent. Now, I don't know if anyone remembers, but Lance Stephenson, a couple years ago, had a great campaign in the Indiana Pacers, playing very well, getting triple-doubles, playing as a primary ball handler with George Hill off-ball, Paul George and Roy Hibbert playing as well, leading to a couple of Eastern Conference Finals runs. He played very, very versatilely and got a lot of rebounds, passed the ball pretty well, and was obviously famous for his phrase, Lance to make him dance. But since that season with Frank Vogel and the Indiana Pacers, he's been pretty much trash with only a couple of bright games in between. Now, he's very difficult to coach, difficult to control on the court. You can't really play him off ball. He's not much of a shooter, but I still think he's a good player. That seems very surprising considering I just kind of labeled him as shit in all capacity. But he's got a great dribble, great handle. He can get to the hoop and score. And I think he has decent court vision. Decent. He can also rebound very well for a guard. And there's worse options in the NBA. To me, it's pretty surprising that no team has even tried to take a waiver on him, like the Grizzlies did last season. I mean, he didn't play too badly for the Grizzlies. They signed him in the middle of the season after he was on the Clippers and didn't get too much playing time. And he did have a couple of great games, and a couple of okay ones, and then a couple of very bad ones. But he performed as well as he could with a team made up of a bunch of D-leaguers and injured players. I mean, honestly, can you blame a guy for not getting assists when one of the main scorers on your team besides you is Briante Weber? I sure can't. So, I mean, I feel like he played pretty well for them, but obviously he still doesn't have a great spacing ability for the floor, and he continues to struggle with being coached. That's one of the main issues, I believe, because it takes a very strong coach to control a player like him, and I'm not even sure if you can control him in general. Some players just don't have the ability to be controlled. He's obviously got the spark, the ability, I would say, the potential to be great, but the situation needs to be pretty much perfect for him to perform the way he did back in Indiana. Obviously, the one time when they played him as a shooter down in Charlotte, he shot 14% for the season on 180 attempts and was absolute trash. They gave him away for nothing. They let him go. They could not stand him. So I think that that's one of the main reasons why teams are very afraid to sign him. And there have been some pretty damning comments by Larry Bird, the GM for the Pacers, back even when Lance Stephenson was part of the team, who said a lot about his inability to be coached and controlled on the court and off the court, which is a huge indictment. Now, there have been some rumors that this may be simply because Larry Bird wants to lower his value so much that the Pacers can re-sign him for a cheaper contract. That's an interesting thing to think about because it's kind of like sabotaging a man and forcing him to make much less than he should earn. But it seems like it may be working because teams are avoiding Lance Stephenson like the plague. Also, apologies, sorry. I should have cut out for 1 second because there is a lawnmower in the background, so ignore that buzzing that you'll hear. Continuing on with Lance Stephenson, I think the Pacers would be a good team to sign him, except for the fact that he's so ball dependent and needs the ball in his hands basically in order to make magic happen, as you might say. In order for him to perform the way he does, he needs to have the ball in his hands, dribbling it up the court, going in fast break or semi-fast break, and breaking down a half-court defense on his own. That's kind of how he plays. That's difficult to have when you have a team with Jeff Teague, Paul George, Monte Ellis. Those three are all going to be calling for the ball and wanting to have it in their hands. So it'll be tough to have him even off the bench. But I think he's still a good player, and there are plenty of teams that might be signing him and might want to if they really notice that he's still there. Another problem that might be happening right now is that his agent, for contracts and such, is actually just a family friend. And if you think about it, that's an awful plan when you're an NBA player because you're going to want someone who's a professional basketball agent so that they understand the workings of contracts, ways to negotiate with teams, have connections with teams. It's probably very difficult if you have a family friend who's not a professional in order to negotiate contracts and even just get meetings with teams. That may be a very important thing for him to consider in the future if he hopes to even get on a team because he's still young. He's only 25 years old, and he's showed potential, and yet no one wants to sign him for some reason. But that's enough about Lance Stephenson. My final topic for today is going to be the interesting team, the Brooklyn Nets. Now, of course, people have had them as a running joke for the past few years due to the fact that they've traded away almost their entire future of first-round picks, to the Boston Celtics for rental of a couple of old, aging superstars in Kevin Durant. Oh my God, Kevin Durant. I didn't realize he was on the Nets. Excuse me. I mean Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, as well as Jason Terry, a couple years ago. But they've been struggling because they haven't had any fresh talent coming in through the draft due to the lack of picks. So what I want to talk about today is their moves this offseason because they'll be having a pick swap with the Boston Celtics at the end of the season. Basically, whatever their pick is, Boston will probably swap picks because they'll be better than the Celtics pick. Now, the Brooklyn Nets probably don't want to give them as good of a pick as possible, which they did last year, having a third pick in the draft as a playoff team, which is very, very useful for the Celtics. The Brooklyn Nets are going to be playing spoiler, basically, this entire season, because every time they get a win, they're hurting the Celtics' chances at a good pick in the draft. And they want that, obviously, because they're in the same division. Never mind just the fact that it's kind of a pride thing. You don't want to be helping another team get better. So they've made a ton of moves trying to improve their chances at a good pick in next year's draft and improve their chances at screwing over the Celtics, which I think is very entertaining to watch. They've been throwing out offers at tons of players, and they've made a ton of signings of mediocre to good players by offering them basically huge overpaying or just big contracts in general that they weren't expecting for multiple years. So I'm going to kind of run through them and just talk about the interesting team that they're building right now. Obviously, they already had Brook Lopez and Thaddeus Young, who were their only really good players, besides maybe Bojan Bogdanovic, who was a small forward for their team that had a couple of great games last year, including a 44-point outburst. So they have a couple of okay to good players already on their roster, but they've really switched it up and tried to sign as many decent players as possible to play spoiler this season. The first thing they did, though, was trade Thaddeus Young to the Pacers for a 2016 first-round pick and a future second-round pick. Now, that's pretty huge because it means they're going to have 2 first-round picks this year, the Pacers and the Celtics once they swap. That's pretty good considering this team has not had first-round picks and won't have another one next year. They're trying to get as much talent, young talent, and potential on their roster as possible and hope that one of them is kind of like a gold mine, an instant fix to the team. I mean, if you can't strike out too many times before something hits, right? Hopefully for the Brooklyn Nets. Otherwise, they're going to want to kill themselves at this rate. But they've also made a couple of interesting signings, like Trevor Booker from the Jazz. He made $4.8 million last year. He's 29. They gave him a 2-year, $18 million contract. He's a pretty good forward. For the Jazz, he had a couple of great moments, a couple of good games, and he can give you some strength, some good defense, and decent scoring on the offensive end. Obviously, he's not fantastic, but he adds another piece to their roster that you can help build around and just build a decently competitive team. So rather than competing for the first pick in the draft, you're competing for the 10th pick in the draft, maybe. That's what they're hoping to do at least. Also, the biggest signing they had, Jeremy Lin, who had a $2.1 million contract last year for the Charlotte Hornets. He finally got paid. 3 years, $36 million. Funnily enough, he's making less than Manu Ginobili next season. But that's a side note. He's going to be making $12 million a year for the next 3 years for the Brooklyn Nets, which is huge because it allows them to get rid of Jarrett Jack, who was a huge net negative across the board for the Nets. Just a huge net negative. So replacing him with an actually capable point guard who showed good ability in the playoffs to score at will, get to the basket, and pass the ball, who struggles a little bit with his handles, but overall is good, with Jeremy Lin. I think that's a huge move for them because it allows them to actually have someone set up their team. Set up Brook Lopez in the post and get a little pick and roll action going because Brook Lopez has a good long range shot, not a 3, but he can hit the long 2 at times, and Jeremy Lin can as well. So you'll have a great pick and roll set up there. Also, they got Louis Scola on a 1-year contract, unknown amount. He's obviously aging. He's 36 right now, but a 1-year contract for him, just so you can play spoiler for a season and try and just win as many games as possible, is not a bad contract. Last year, he even added a 3-point shot, shooting 65 out of 161, which is 40% from 3, compared to only 10 for 60 in his previous 8 seasons combined. So he multiplied his makes by 6.5 times and total attempts by only 2.5, raising his percentage to 40%. That's a pretty incredible shift in a game for a 36-year-old to actually have in 1 season, which could allow him to provide some great spacing for the Brooklyn Nets for maybe about 20 minutes a game compared with Brook Lopez and just help give some veteran savvy to the team. They also got Anthony Bennett, who we all know is the first-round pick of the draft, one of the biggest busts ever by the Cleveland Cavaliers back in 2013. They signed him to 2 years minimum contract, first year guaranteed actually. He was from the Raptors last season making $4.6 million off of his rookie contract, but now he's on a minimum contract because he sucks. But you know what? He's a first-round pick in the draft, which means that he has some potential to be good. And from what I've seen in the Canadian games for the Olympic qualifiers, he's got some skills still. The only problem is whether or not he can actually be motivated enough to try and care. I mean, man, you're making millions of dollars playing a kid's sport and you can't try or care enough? Dude looks like he was forced into this and he wanted to be a doctor or something. That's what it looks like when you watch him play. But if he can try and actually care about the sport of basketball for maybe even 50 games this year, he might really contribute to them winning a little bit more. So instead of, 15 wins, they're looking at maybe 25 wins in total with this roster. They also picked up another good guard for off the bench in Grievous Vasquez, who was off the Bucks. He's 29. He's pretty good. He's got a nice shot. He can still pass very well and has decent court vision. He played for the Raptors originally in his career and was good for them. The only problem is he's basically a turnstile on defense. You might as well not have anyone out there. Kind of like Jose Calderon, who I ripped on earlier this week. He's making 1 year, $5 million now, which is a good contract for a player like that. You're basically renting him for the season in order to have a backup point guard off the bench that can help give you some offense and improve your team just a little bit, because they really didn't have another backup point guard. They also picked up 25-year-old guard Joe Harris from Orlando Magic, gave him a 2-year, $2.2 million contract, just because he might have a chance to be good and contribute to the team, or he might not, and either way the contract is so small that it doesn't matter. That's another one of those examples of players that they're just kind of throwing a waiver at and seeing whether or not it works, because if it does, it'll go down as a great move, and if it doesn't, well then, it doesn't matter. They gave him, $2.2 million for 2 years. Also, the last one I want to talk about, Justin Hamilton, who they got from Valencia in La Liga, over in Spain. He's a big center, 7 foot. They gave him a 2-year, $6 million contract because he might be able to contribute on the defensive end as a good shot blocker and provide them with some stability in the rotation once Brook Lopez has to go to the bench or go to the hospital for his obviously guaranteed season-ending foot injury. And I hope I did not just jinx that. Please do not yell at me in the comments if he ends up getting hurt later on this year. I am hoping he does not, because I am so sick and tired of him having injuries, because he can play. So overall, they created a pretty good roster that can compete for 25 wins this season, maybe, if everything works together. And obviously that sounds like I'm shitting on them still, but in reality, for the Brooklyn Nets, that's an improvement. Any sort of hope and chance at success, especially with their rookie Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, who showed some success last year, any sort of hope like that, bright light at the end of the tunnel, is great. And now they're going to have 2 first-round picks, even if they do suck. So, cheers to the Brooklyn Nets for playing spoiler this season and trying to ruin the Celtics as much as they can. But that's all I have for today, guys. If you did enjoy, please leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment complaining about the lawnmower in the background if you'd like, or talking about basketball, whatever you want to bring up. Maybe even some topics for next day's show, because I'm looking for anything you guys want to talk about. So let me know if you want to have anything specifically mentioned or discussed in the show. Break down certain teams if you enjoy watching those teams. And I'll be back with you tomorrow, bringing you another episode. Thanks for listening to the Pick and Pod. Have a great day, everyone.